Tonight, Iran vows revenge after the U.S. kills a top general.
We did not take action to start a war.
A dramatic escalation in a standoff that could destabilize the entire region. So how does this end? Our experts are standing by.
If you can leave, you must leave.
A mass evacuation. Thousands flee catastrophic heat and flames. More and more tourists are having babies in Canada for citizenship, then skipping out on their hospital bill.
You see? All Mac.
Canada's biggest ever lotto jackpot, $70 million. This is The National. There has been another airstrike inside Iraq tonight, this one targeting Iran-backed militia. And it comes just a day after a U.S. airstrike killed Iran's most powerful general. Now the United States is expecting retaliation. Iran is promising it, and the rest of the world is holding its breath. General Qasem Soleimani was killed leaving Baghdad's airport yesterday. A major escalation in tensions between Iran and the U.S. They were already high after a series of back and forth attacks that culminated in violence at the U.S. Embassy in Iraq this week. The Americans claim Soleimani was planning more attacks. The big questions now, was this the right strategic move for the U.S.? And what will the consequences be for the region, the Americans, and their allies? We start our coverage with Paul Hunter and the reaction in the U.S., including from the man who ordered the strike himself.
What the United States did yesterday should have been done long ago.
Donald Trump today on the stunning killing of Qasem Soleimani.
We took action last night to stop a war. We did not take action to start a war.
Already called one of the most consequential acts of his presidency, the strike against Soleimani was today defended as necessary after intelligence deemed by the U.S. to be urgent.
He was actively plotting in the region to take actions, a big action as he described it, that would have put dozens, if not hundreds, of American lives at risk. We know it was imminent.
Trump critics worried war may now loom. Today underlined their view Soleimani was a terrorist and a killer, but that lawmakers have seen no details on why this had to happen now. After all, said one, it's hardly the first time the U.S. had considered killing him.
We've had this chance before. Republican and Democratic administrations has always pondered the question, is the value of taking out Soleimani greater than the retaliation and the potential for a protracted conflict? Now that this administration decided to take out Soleimani, they have to come to us and tell us, first of all, what were the facts?
But with the threat from Iran of retaliation, the Pentagon also announced today a dramatic boost to U.S. military strength in the region, sending some 3,500 more U.S. troops to the Middle East on top of the 700 sent earlier this week. Meanwhile, from Trump this week at his Mar-a-Lago resort, a warning. Indeed, it could very well escalate if Iran now tries anything.
I am ready and prepared to take whatever action is necessary. And that in particular refers to Iran.
This as word tonight of another strike within Iraq, targeting members of a militia backed by Iran, coming as the U.S. now urges all Americans inside Iraq to exit the country immediately. Paul Hunter, CBC News, Washington.
For years, Qasem Soleimani crisscrossed the Middle East, shaping it through violence. Carolyn Dunn shows us what he leaves behind, a legacy of blood and rage.
Outrage exploded on the streets of Tehran. Death to the U.S., they shout. All of their leaders should be killed too, this protester says. General Qasem Soleimani was a leader of towering stature in Iran, powerful, respected, and feared. Considered second only to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who today met personally with Soleimani's widow, vowing harsh retaliation for his death. It was a message repeated across Iran. We will take revenge so harsh, says this cleric, their bright day will turn into a dark night. General Soleimani's influence reached far beyond Iran as the head of an elite arm of the Revolutionary Guard. A power that didn't always sit well where he wielded it. So some celebrated his death. We have not wanted Iran's influence in Iraq from the beginning, she says. The U.S. considered Soleimani personally responsible for attacks on their forces in the region for some 20 years. The army he led was designated a foreign terror organization by the U.S.
Things are going to get much uglier in the next few days and the next few weeks, regardless of what you think of Iran and General Soleimani. And there is much blood on his hand. But this is the attack on the nerve center.
In recent days, tensions between the U.S. and Iran had escalated over militant activities in Iraq. Now, martyring the hero of Iranian hardliners may spiral the proxy war between Iran and the U.S. out of control. One Islamic Guard commander warned the Americans should prepare themselves. Because of their crimes, he says, there is no peace anywhere. Carolyn Dunn, CBC News, London.
Iran's promised revenge is likely to fall on targets in the region. The reaction from countries in the crosshairs? Some condemnation, some satisfaction, and hasty preparation.
President Trump deserves all the credit for acting swiftly, forcefully, decisively.
The Israeli prime minister supported the killing, but also canceled a trip to Greece. Israeli embassies and forces at the border are on high alert. Another potential target, regional rival Saudi Arabia. With its oil industry vulnerable, Riyadh is wary of escalation and has called for self-restraint. And Iraq is torn between Tehran and Washington. Iraq's prime minister, friendly with Iran, denounced Soleimani's killing, saying it would light the fuse of a destructive war. Canada has about 500 soldiers in Iraq, training local forces and in harm's way. The Minister of Foreign Affairs said Canadian safety in the region is of paramount concern, but also said that Soleimani had a destabilizing effect in the region and beyond. Many Canadians have close ties to Iran, and as Ellen Morrow explains, they're now worried about what this could mean for the safety of their loved ones who live there.
Iranian Canadians bitterly opposed to the regime in Tehran celebrated the assassination of its top commander.
One of the most dangerous person has been eliminated.
Change, change, change. But with the cheers, there was also trepidation. In Toronto's Little Tehran, few wanted to be interviewed, too worried about consequences for their family in Iran.
Every day you live worried about what's going to happen in the Middle East. You know, it shouldn't be worried. I pray every day to the God.
Yasemin Kahiri's father is in the country.
With everything given in the Middle East, it can create some commotion and instability that will not suit or serve the Iranian people.
And with that anxiety, calls like this one are precious as Iranian Canadians try to comfort family who stayed behind.
Everybody is worried, I think, these days, because the possibility of another war in the Middle East is really scary.
But even as they fear violence, Iranians here say a threat right now is an economy devastated by crippling sanctions. This man blames the regime. Where hiding his identity, he fears reprisals for speaking out.
I just say, God, please help people, because it's getting worse, and I'm hoping nothing happened to people.
A hope shared by a diaspora waiting for news a world away. Ellen Morrow, CBC News, Toronto.
So after that strike, what comes next for Iran and the whole region? Did killing Soleimani make the world a more dangerous place? We'll hear from some experts in about half an hour. At this moment, one of the largest evacuations in Australia's history is underway. The already devastating wildfires are getting worse. It is now Saturday morning in Australia, on a day which could be the most destructive yet. There are still about 200 fires burning, the dry heat spiking to 46 degrees. Along with high winds, this is a recipe for disaster. Salima Shivji now with the emphatic warning from authorities.
As the steady stream of people rush to get out of harm's way with the Navy's help, some try to block out what they saw earlier this week, when stuck on the beach with the flames fast approaching.
When the fire started and the embers were flying everywhere, we just wanted to stay together and it was scary.
Haven't been able to process it, no, not yet, no. We're all down at the foreshore and it's something that I want to forget.
That might not be so easy with the situation worsening. The fires are not just along the eastern coast. On Kangaroo Island in South Australia, the heat is so intense, the flames are morphing into twisters. A now deadly fire, the mayor says, is just impossible to stop. Elsewhere, people are trying desperately to protect their homes as they wait for more extreme heat.
That's what we're worried about. Fires starting around the house, so we're going to stay and defend and put those out the best we can.
Others are camping out not far from their homes, still in the danger zone.
So hopefully there's enough cleared space, and worst comes to worst, we've got the water there to retreat to. Not wanting to get trapped on the highway in a fire, we've decided to stay.
But from officials, a stern warning.
We've been very honest with people about the risk, but if people choose to stay, then that's on them. I guess what they have to do is they have to understand that if they choose to do that, do not expect that this is going to be a fire truck there if you ring.
He says don't wait until the last minute to escape in your car. It's too dangerous, and the window to leave is closing quickly.
If you can leave, you must leave.
As the whole country braces for what's to come. Salima Shibji, CBC News, Vancouver.
The fires have already left a trail of devastation and thick, choking smoke. Here's a satellite image of the southeast coast last July, and here it was 2 days ago. At least 22 people have died and dozens more are missing. This night vision aerial footage shot earlier this week shows the scale. The fire has consumed 50,000 square kilometers. Some mothers are going the distance to make sure their baby gets Canadian citizenship. An investigation by our colleagues at the Fifth Estate reveals a growing number of women are spending thousands to give birth in Canada, then return to their home countries, citizenship for their newborns guaranteed. It's called birth tourism, and as Erica Johnson shows us, it's not just controversial, it's raising concerns that it may be straining our healthcare system.
Kathy Shi has flown here from China to give birth.
Your baby will be Canadian. How do you feel about that?
It will cost over $55,000 Canadian, she says, but worth it. Canadian citizenship means easier access to Canadian universities down the road, no international tuition fees, access to publicly funded services like healthcare, and families can be sponsored. The Fifth Estate has compiled figures, learned the number of babies born to non-residents of Canada is higher than ever, almost 5,000 in 2018, up 15% from the year before. And Richmond Hospital in BC is a kind of ground zero. Last year, nearly 1/4 of all births here, more than 450 babies, were born to non-residents, most from China.
Hello， 大家好，我现在所在的位置呢，就是大温地区的列治文医院。
Online, we find websites promoting birth tourism in Canada, some recommending Richmond Hospital. Nurses we talk to there don't want to be identified, but tell us the influx is adding to their workload, compromising care. There are times when the people living here don't get the service that they need, one nurse told us. Another said it's all about the money. If there was no financial income for the hospital, the private pay would have been out the door a long time ago.
I certainly think that, adding additional patients into a healthcare system that isn't staffed appropriately, isn't funded appropriately, is causing strain.
Non-residents at Richmond Hospital pay a deposit of $10,000 for a vaginal delivery, $16,000 for a cesarean. But since 2017, more than $2 million in related healthcare expenses hasn't been paid.
It affects the health system. We need equipments. We need to hire staff.
This specialist works at another Vancouver area hospital. He says birth tourists can rack up unexpected bills of $10,000 a day when a baby needs acute care. Sometimes parents don't have it and leave without paying.
They can't just come, spend the time in the intensive care, take the passport, and then off you go without paying.
Other hospitals are out money too, but the Fifth Estate has found no one is adding up just how much is owed across the country.
And Erica joins us from the Vancouver newsroom. I think some of these numbers on birth tourism might surprise people, Erica. What are politicians saying?
Well, Ian, we interviewed BC's Minister of Health, and he said that he thinks birth tourism is a concern. He said he doesn't think that many Canadians would be in favor of this practice, and that the province is doing a better job of clamping down on the debt that is owed. We asked for some province-wide numbers, though, on that, and that was never provided. We also asked for an interview with the federal immigration minister, and that request was declined. The department did tell us, though, that they are looking at birth tourism, studying it, and that it does need more research.
All right, Erica, thank you.
Thank you.
And you can see more of that investigation this week on the Fifth Estate, Sunday night at 9:30 Newfoundland, on CBC Television and CBC Gem. Well, on to Canada's biggest ever lottery jackpot. 70 million tax-free dollars is the big prize in tonight's Lotto Max draw. And with that much at stake, there is no shortage of people hoping to beat the almost impossible odds. Greg Ross caught up with a few of them.
Long before the draw, people were already dreaming about what they could buy if they won the jackpot.
Maybe a boat. I've never had a boat before.
I think I would take a trip to Romania.
Well, you get yourself a lawyer and a good accountant. That's the first thing you do.
People lined up to get in on this record-breaking Lotto Max draw.
Absolutely. We definitely see an increase in ticket sales once we hit a $50 million jackpot.
And with the jackpot hitting 70 million for the first time ever, we could see record-breaking ticket sales as well. This man had a good feeling after getting his.
Let me see. Are those the winning numbers right there?
Yeah.
They are the winning numbers.
Should be the winning number.
This man hoping to increase his odds by buying more tickets.
I got $50 worth of Lotto Max.
But University of Toronto statistics professor Jeffrey Rosenthal says it won't help much.
You are about 5 times more likely to die in a car crash on your way to the store if you're driving to buy a ticket.
That's the winner here.
The odds of winning the Lotto Max are 1 in 33.2 million. Odds so bad that, well...
You're about 8 times more likely that if you pick someone at random, that they will one day be the Prime Minister of Canada. If you pick an adult woman at random, the chance of winning the jackpot is the same as the chance that this random woman will give birth in the next 40 seconds.
The list goes on and on.
Do you think it'd be better for people to just put that money into a bank and save it?
Well, I do. In terms of maximizing your profit, the smartest thing to do is not to buy lottery tickets at all.
But where's the fun in that? Besides, if your numbers do come up, think of all the people you could help.
My children, adult children, and I would help my nieces and nephews with their mortgages.
What about your local TV reporter? Would you help him?
You know, a coffee, maybe even lunch.
That's better than nothing, I guess.
Greg Ross, CBC News, Toronto.
We are back in 2 minutes with more news. Just days before the start of the Harvey Weinstein trial, how has the industry changed? And first,
I saw my name up on the list as number 1. I literally yelled out Yahoo.
A second chance for one MP's private members bill. We'll tell you about his effort to save lives. With the new year comes the promise of something great for one Alberta MP. Len Weber spent more than a year trying to get a deeply personal private members bill passed, but then the election killed it. Now, as Janice McGregor explains, he's getting an incredible second chance.
You won the lottery.
Yes, won the lottery.
Len Weber has returned to his Calgary riding after getting the backbencher equivalent of the best gift ever.
I'm first on the list.
A second chance for his private members legislation, making it easier to give the gift of life. His idea: add a question on organ donation to federal tax returns.
We need to tap into Canadians to get them to register. Why not the income tax form? That hits almost every Canadian.
Alberta does lag behind other provinces.
Weber's work as a provincial politician helped start Alberta's donor registry.
Why is organ donation such a passion for you?
Yeah, you might see me tear up answering that question, but I won't. I lost my wife many years ago to cancer, and One of the last things she really said to me was that she regretted the fact that she could not donate her organs.
But only about 1 in 5 Canadians has registered to be a donor. When he got to Ottawa, Weber wanted to change that.
In the week since we have debated this bill, 5 more Canadians have died awaiting a life-saving transplant.
It's hard to get a private member's bill passed, but Weber came really close a year ago.
And this bill has been unanimously supported by the Health Committee.
Finance Minister Bill Morneau even set aside the funding, but the Senate ran out of time to pass this bill before the election. Now it has to be reintroduced in the new parliament, and Weber had to go back in the draw that decides which MPs get time to debate their bills.
So when we went in there and I saw my name up on the list as number 1, I literally yelled out, Yahoo! And I believe that there's a God up there, and even more so now.
Weber's bill is now first up in the new year, but there's something else on his holiday wish list.
Please talk about this around the table. In the end, it's the families that make that decision. Even though you may have registered, let your family know.
Janice McGregor, CBC News, Ottawa.
Some other stories we're following across the country. Federal Conservatives say they'll choose a new leader on June 27th. Andrew Scheer resigned as party leader last month after mounting criticism from former Conservative insiders. The party says the current minority government has members pushing for a quick transition to allow the Conservatives to prepare in case of an early election. Scheer will stay on as leader until a new one is chosen. A nasty winter storm is rolling through much of British Columbia. Heavy winds and rain are pummeling the south coast, causing power outages and ferry cancellations across much of the region. Meanwhile, northern areas have been blanketed with snow, leading to several highway closures and communities still recovering from a New Year's Eve storm. The weather also prompted a rare extreme avalanche warning for the mountains just north of Vancouver. And following considerable backlash, poet George Eliot Clarke has canceled that planned lecture this month at the University of Regina. The former poet laureate was set to give a talk on truth and reconciliation, but he faced criticism for working with a man convicted of manslaughter in the death of an Indigenous woman. Clarke said he might include poetry from the man in his lecture. He released a statement today saying he never intended to hurt the victim's family and the Indigenous community. When we come back, on the eve of Harvey Weinstein's trial, how has the industry changed after Me Too?
Just no surprises. We should have a very clear plan before we get to set about what's going to happen.
We look at the new role of intimacy coordinators, and later. We return to our top story. What does retaliation from Iran look like? We ask the experts. Harvey Weinstein's long-awaited trial starts Monday. It's been more than 2 years since women started accusing the former Hollywood producer of sexual abuse and misconduct. Their stories helped usher in the Me Too era. And since then, a lot has changed, including how the film and TV industry shoots intimate scenes. As Tashana Reed explains, several major production companies now require so-called intimacy coordinators on set.
3, 2, 1.
It can be an embrace, a kiss between two actors, or the depiction of sex.
Held embrace, you can go cheek to cheek, which is how I like to do rehearsals, really putting the weight on one another without intimately kissing.
For Lindsay Summers, her job is to make sure on-set intimacy is comfortable for everyone before the cameras start rolling.
Wait.
Summers is an intimacy coordinator. She's part of a growing field of trained experts sought after by film and TV productions to ensure actors feel safe performing intimate scenes.
That's my motto, is just no surprises. We should have a very clear plan before we get to set about what's going to happen.
In a recent interview, actor Emilia Clarke spoke about terrifying nude sex scenes on the first season of Game of Thrones. Actor Salma Hayek wrote about being pressured by film producer Harvey Weinstein into a nude sex scene in the film Frida. But the industry, post-Me Too, is showing change. In 2019, Summers and her business partner Casey Hudecki worked on 30 film and TV sets in Toronto alone. And HBO, Amazon Prime, and Netflix now require intimacy coordinators on their sets.
Can I hold your hands? Yes.
Intimacy coordinators meet with the director to discuss the degree of nudity, wardrobe, and choreography for the intimate scene.
We are including the performer's personal boundaries into the choreography and into the structure of what we're doing. We're not expecting them to be puppets or chess pieces. You're comfortable with Umberly's hands on your shoulders, okay?
For young actor Lee Gonzales, having an intimacy coordinator helps her feel confident in vulnerable scenes.
Choreographing every single movement, it makes you look at the scene technically and then emotionally. So I'm not just improvising where I'm going to touch or where I'm going to move.
For most of actor Liz Whitmer's career, she's never worked with an intimacy coordinator.
Certainly when I've been on set and felt compromised, it's usually because of a last-minute change. And then I arrive at set and there's been a last-minute rewrite, and all of a sudden I'm not wearing pants.
Whitmer's first experience with an intimacy coordinator was this year with Summers on the Netflix show Designated Survivor.
It meant that I was free to do my job, which was just be in the scene, just be an actor.
Intimacy coordinators say they want to see the same rigor that goes into fight scenes and stunts applied to intimate scenes, too. Tashana Reed, CBC News, Toronto.
As the Weinstein trial gets underway, CBC News will be bringing you a series called Me Too 2020 that looks at the state of the movement and what's changed. Adrian has a preview of what you'll see here next week.
A black car is pulled up and Harvey Weinstein is emerging right now.
By now, all are aware Harvey Weinstein is the accused predator soon going on trial. But there's been far less outrage about how the allegations were kept hidden for so long. A legal system of secret deals, non-disclosure agreements that may have enabled years of abuse.
As it were.
We speak with the journalists who found this rotten core of the Harvey Weinstein story and the women who know firsthand the power those agreements have to silence.
That agreement was unethical and egregious on every level. And they're telling you that this is how the law works, then for me, the world was over.
These secret settlements are no joke. They are no joke, and that there are women to this day who are scared of breaking them.
That's in the days to come on The National.
We'll be right back with more developing news from around the world, the latest twist in the former Nissan executive's escape from Japan, and more on the killing of Soleimani. What's next for the region and for the United States? We ask our panel of experts. Welcome back. Here's some of the international stories we're watching tonight. Police in France shot and killed a man after he attacked people with a knife in a park near Paris. One person was killed, 2 were injured during the rampage. Those 2 injured victims are being treated in a hospital. A spokesman for the prosecutor says the attacker had a history of mental illness and that he had been admitted to hospital a few months ago. That assailant was in his early 20s and was born in a suburb of Paris. The death toll in Indonesia continues to climb. At least 43 people have been killed in flash flooding. Hundreds of thousands more have been left homeless. Jakarta has been experiencing record rainfall all week. More than 30 centimeters fell in and around the city on Tuesday alone. And there's more rain in the forecast. A Turkish jet operator says former head of Nissan Carlos Ghosn used its planes illegally to escape from Japan. 7 people were arrested in Turkey, including 4 pilots. Ghosn was awaiting trial on financial misconduct in Japan. He slipped out of the country via Turkey and then on to Lebanon. He's expected to hold a news conference in Beirut next week. Now back to our top story. The growing concern around the world after a U.S. drone strike in Iraq killed a top Iranian general. Iran has vowed retaliation. So where does this leave the region? We'll get into that in a moment, but first, let's look at how we got here.
This has been going on now for weeks and weeks and weeks.
1 week ago, a rocket attack in northern Iraq killed a U.S. military contractor. The Americans blame the Iranian-backed militant group Hezbollah brigades. 2 days later, the U.S. launched multiple airstrikes at targets in Iraq and Syria, killing at least 25 fighters. The next day, Hezbollah brigades denied responsibility and vowed to retaliate. Then on New Year's Eve, hundreds of Iraqis stormed the U.S. embassy compound in Baghdad. among them 2 powerful Iranian-backed militant leaders. Thousands of U.S. troops were placed on standby. And then last night, that massive escalation. A U.S. drone strike outside the Baghdad International Airport, killing General Qasem Soleimani as the puppet master of Iran's proxy forces throughout the Middle East. Soleimani was seen as second in power only to the Ayatollah himself. So all of this has raised anxiety and questions about what might happen next, and we're going to tackle that right now. Joining us, Janice Stein of the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, Kaveh Shahruz, a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and from Waterloo, where she teaches at the University of Waterloo, Besma Momani. Janice, let's start with what I think is a key question for a lot of people tonight, which is any of this moving us closer towards war?
I certainly don't think we're going to see an all-out war between Iran and the United States, which is what is raising anxiety. There is a likelihood that there will be some further escalation. I think everyone here is aware, particularly in Iran, of how dangerous a rapid jump up the ladder is. And so, I do not think we will see an all-out war between these two countries.
Kaveh?
I actually entirely agree with that. I think, there's a lot of heated rhetoric nowadays, and Iran's leaders have to bluff and bluster a little bit, and they have to retaliate in some way, and we can certainly discuss what that retaliation would look like. But I think the Iranians recognize that, in any sort of direct combat with the Americans, they would not be able to hold on to power very long, and I think they're primarily interested in preserving their power. And I get the impression that even the Americans, the Trump administration is not interested in war. It's not very domestically popular in an election year, particularly.
So, Besma, let's bring you in on that. If not war, then what might retaliation look like?
Well, I think we're going to see the Iranians possibly using its proxy forces throughout the region. It will want to, I think, attack probably Western interests, particularly commercial ones. Cyber warfare is not off the table. That is something that the Iranians have been perfecting over the years. So I think there's a lot of possibilities out there. And make no mistake, I think the Iranian hardliners do want to avenge the death of Soleimani. One really can't underestimate how valuable he was to the Iranian enterprise. So I think it's going to be a rough road ahead for many people in the region in particular, who are frankly going to be caught in the crossfires of both the Americans and the Iranians going after each other after this.
Kaveh?
I think that's right. I think the Iranians have every incentive to retaliate in some way to save face. You will see their proxies do certain things. You will see cyber warfare, likely terrorist attacks, perhaps. But at the end of the day, I think they will have to contain it in some way because, as I mentioned earlier, they can't engage in direct warfare. It's asymmetric warfare that they might be able to succeed in.
So, Janice, I think some people might have been relieved when they heard you say that there was unlikely to be actual war. But then now, we hear about this potentially rough road ahead. I mean, do you feel there'll be retaliation?
Yes, there will be some things, certainly, although I think there's a risk that we over-exaggerate Soleimani's importance. He's a divisive figure inside. His real ties are to the militias that he built outside Iran. But I think the kind of retaliation we're going to see, it's going to be very calibrated. We've already had, Ian, an attack on a tanker. We've had attack on bases. We'll see some of that, but that's a far cry from saying this is a war that is going to engulf the whole area. I just don't think that's going to happen.
Okay, speaking of the area, I'm going to ask each of you this. A country that you think we should be looking at in terms of a potential target of retaliation, or Besma, where things might happen next. What spot would you focus on?
Well, I'm most concerned about Iraq and Lebanon because they've really been the site of where the Iranian regime has most meddled in the region and has been most able to use proxy forces for its purposes. And I think what the Iraqis are very afraid of is indeed this is going to embolden their hardliners. This is going to potentially make a parliament in favor of asking the U.S. forces to leave. One thing that I've been watching for several months now is both Iraq and Lebanon have had these protesters and demonstrators calling calling for the end of Iranian meddling. And unfortunately, I think what you're going to see is, in fact, the Iranians make it more, frankly, impossible for those protesters to be heard. They've already captured the narrative in the past 24 hours, obviously, and I think they're just going to make very fragile democratic politics in those countries even more problematic and really get all of their proxy forces in high gear to disrupt life for the average Lebanese and Iraqi.
Janice, we talked a little bit about the type of retaliation, what that might look like. Let's do it through this geographic lens. What country will you be looking at?
Well, I know a lot of people are, and Besma just mentioned this, are looking at Hezbollah in Lebanon and Israel. Here, too, I'm going to sound an optimistic note. Hezbollah has a lot of experience with Israel and Israel with Hezbollah. And both of them understand how easy it is to go up that ladder. I very much doubt that Hezbollah will avenge Soleimani's death by provoking an all-out war with Israel. So I actually don't think that's going to be the primary site of retaliation, much more likely in Iraq, where it's harder to control these popular mobilization forces.
And you want to look a little further afield.
Yeah, not as a site of reprisal, perhaps, but as a country to watch. I think Russia is a really important player in this region. So Russia has a very direct impact on what happens on the ground in Syria, where Soleimani was very, very active and the Iranian regime is very active. And Russia has a lot of influence over what the Iranian regime does. So if they want to escalate things, I mean, I think they have that kind of influence to call for Iran to escalate. If they want to de-escalate, they can turn down the heat a little bit.
Besma, with Soleimani gone here, I'm not sure how the succession of power works within his organization. Can he be easily replaced, or does this make a big difference to his organization?
Well, he's already been replaced. The replacement's been announced. I think the important thing to point out here, though, is that I do think Soleimani is unique. Again, no one in the region, well, very few people in the region are really shedding honest tears for this man. There's a lot of blood on his hands. But the reality is he was seen as a folk hero by some. He was seen as a military genius by others, even amongst many of the people that we today look at, like Assad's regime and others who we despise. But the reality is he was well respected in some circles. So, you know, I don't think Soleimani is easily replaced at that level of folk heroism and intellect, but certainly I don't think the IRGC and the entire Iranian Revolutionary Guard is going to stop its activities throughout the region. This is not the end of Iran's nefarious activities throughout the region. Quite the contrary, we're going to see it very much escalate.
One last question that I'll put to each of you, and in the immediate aftermath of the news of the airstrike, you know, I went to Twitter and I saw this very polarized reaction, particularly from the United States. Was this the right thing to do? What, you know, so I ask you guys this question, not through a political lens, but being analysts. And Janice, I'll begin with you.
You know, Obama almost did it, Ian, and then pulled back at the last moment. So Soleimani has been in the line of sight for a while. You only know whether this is the right thing to do. We will only know months and months after the fact. But there is one risk here. Soleimani's primary value was he could control these proxy forces because he built them. He had personal relationships. He knew everybody, and they were loyal. I think there's no question it's going to be more difficult for the Iranian military to control these forces over these next several months.
Harvey?
I think opinion, as you mentioned, seems to be very divided. I am always very reluctant to say anything positive about Donald Trump, but I think what the Trump administration's figured out is that you know, the problem is not just Soleimani, but the IRGC and the Iranian regime as a whole. And I think what I hope the Trump administration and the rest of the democratic world realizes that what they have to do is they actually have to help Iranian people ultimately topple this regime. Because so long as this theocratic regime stays in place, so long as they continue their nefarious activities, you're going to see this kind of export of terrorism, you're going to see repression, you're going to see brutality. And fundamentally, the solution to all this is a new democratic secular regime that's brought about by the Iranian people.
And Besma, the last minute to you.
Look, I think there's going to be short-term gratification in many quarters, even in the Middle East. Again, the effect Soleimani has had on the region is a negative one in so many ways. But the unintended consequences of what this might lead to, the potential snowballing of events that are disastrous for the region and for many, many civilians. History will tell, of course, and what this means to international law and other sort of liberal principles that we value is something to be debated. But of course, I'm not shedding any tears over his death.
Smart, measured analysis from all three of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
And if you have any more questions about the tensions in Iran and what it could mean for Canada, send us a note at the national@cbc.ca. We'll continue to follow the story, of course, in the days and weeks ahead. After the break, a digital blueprint for the past. The new technology helping dinosaurs come alive. That's next. And saying goodbye to Schitt's Creek.
The last scene we did in the motel was a very, very emotional kind of experience. The motel set was actually our home. It felt like home.
As the 6th and final season is about to begin, Andrew gets the inside scoop from Eugene Levy.
Some kind of plot hint, some kind of teaser.
Oh, you're not getting anything, Andrew.
Okay, sort of. The laughs and legacy of the Levy's all-Canadian creation, Sunday on The National. The study of dinosaur fossils is changing at Alberta's Royal Tyrrell Museum thanks to new technology. As Alison Dempster explains, 3D printing is helping bring some of the museum's fragile specimens to life.
I'm painting a 3D print right now.
Amy Kowalchuk prepares a jawbone for a new exhibit at the Royal Tyrrell Museum. The replica is based on a fossil tens of millions of years old.
Especially in paleontology, we're dealing with priceless specimens that are very, very delicate, and you really don't want to be damaging them.
These days, Kowalchuk spends a lot of her time behind a lens, building digital blueprints of the museum's discoveries.
You just have to take multiple photographs from multiple angles, and then from that you can triangulate them using computer programs, and then that gives you your 3D model.
That modeling is helping the museum show off some of its most fragile but impressive finds. This tyrannosaur specimen, known as the exploded skull, has 41 pieces, some of them extremely delicate. Thanks to some 3D printed elements, it's now on display.
At the front here, we have the part of the brain that's responsible for sense of smell.
The technology is also adding a new dimension to Francois Terrien's research on dinosaur brains. He's using reconstructed brain cavities to get a better idea of dinosaur behavior, including how they tracked their prey.
Before trying to reconstruct the brain structure or the brain shape of these extinct animals required a lot of work. We needed to break the bones or have skulls that were already broken and then pour latex in there and try to peel out an endocast or a cast of the brain cavity. Now we can all do that with CT scanning and 3D printing. So we can ask a lot of questions that previously would have been impossible to do.
More and more museums are digitizing their collections, helping dinosaurs come alive for researchers and fans alike. Alison Dempster, CBC News, Drumheller, Alberta.
Still ahead on The National.
I've had kids stop me on my way into the rink and look at me and say, "Aren't you too old to play hockey?"
How a women's hockey league in Whitehorse became a family affair. Next in our moment. A hockey team can often feel like a family, and for many players in the Whitehorse Women's Hockey League, it actually is. There are 5 mother-daughter duos playing in the league this year, and although it's not intentionally aiming to be a family bonding activity, the league has become a family affair, which makes it our moment.
There was a few ladies that got together and said, hey, you know, if we're going to have a league in this town, we need to build that league. We need to grow that league. And to do that, you need to make it all-encompassing.
I'd never skated before, so the first hockey game was the first time on the ice.
The Whitehorse women's community is really strong, and like the connections you make with other women, it invites more women to come play.
Our husbands come to the game and cheer us on, so it's kind of nice for my husband and father-in-law to bond. And
I don't always respond, though, when she yells mom for the pass.
I've had kids stop me on my way into the rink and look at me and say, "Aren't you too old to play hockey?"
And what do you say?
I say, of course not.
Never too old, never too young.
That's it, never too old.
It is a great league, a great story. I really envy them because my sons are fantastic skaters. I can't properly turn right, so I don't think there's a men's league in Vancouver big enough for the three of us. Maybe this is the year that I try to change that, at least the skating part. In any event, that is the National for January the 3rd. Good night.